Ma'am, shall we begin the session, ma'am?
Yes, I'm
Shall
ready.
we allow the participants, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm handing over the session to Donna. Over to you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Quoting Nelson Mandela, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. With great joy and immense pleasure, I extend my warm welcome to all dignitaries, guests, and delegates present here for the Dr. Sudhir Raj and Memorial Free Webinar Series organized by DIKSHA Academy in association with Ayurveda College Coimbatore under the banner of Asadika Amrit Mahotsav. In today's session, we will be discussing about unraveling autoimmune diseases through the lens of Ayurveda by Dr. Pratibha Shah.
Before starting the session, I would like to go through a few of the basic instructions to be followed throughout the session. For uninterrupted class session, use laptop with high-speed internet connection. Please make sure your microphone is on mute to have a disturbance-free session. In case of any disruption, please set your internet connection firstly, and if the problem is within our network connection, kindly raise the issue in the chat box. Filling your full name to be displayed is appreciated. Any questions can be posted in the chat box. Questions raised will be cleared at the end of the session.
Next, I would like to invite Dr. Rajalakshmi Ma'am, Associate Professor, Department of Swasthavritta, Ayurveda College, Coimbatore, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Doctor. On behalf of DIKSHA E-Learning Academy and Ayurveda College, Coimbatore, I would like to welcome Dr. Pratibha Shah Ma'am, Founder, President, Council for Ayurveda Research, and CEO, My Ayurveda LLC, Boston, USA. And with more than 30 years of clinical experience and being a very good orator and being associated with many national and international conferences as a keynote speaker, I hope she's a very right person you have selected to discuss on the topic autoimmune diseases through Ayurveda. So I request all the participants to make use of this session and make the session more interactive and lively also. I welcome ma'am and all the participants wholeheartedly to this session free webinar series under the banner of Asadika Amrit Mahotsav. Enjoy the session. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Pratibha Shah ma'am. Dr. Pratibha Shah, BMS, MD, MPH, is an internationally renowned Ayurveda expert, intensely trained in traditional health sciences as well as public health. She distills Eastern wisdom with an understanding of Western principles for the best care of her clients, and she has more than 30 years of experience in clinical practices. Her pioneering initiatives in the field of Ayurveda have brought her to attention at the White House and the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the Consulate General of India, NYC. She is a prolific speaker and educator in the community. She has been an invited speaker in many local and international conferences and has given several keynote addresses. She has authored several papers and is an editor with the Ayurveda Journal on Health. She is a senior faculty and domain expert at Kerala Ayurveda Academy, USA, and for Boston School of Academy. For her work, she was nominated in the top 20 Women of the Year for the year 2014. Before moving to US in 2004, she was working as Chief Medical Officer with the Central Government of India in the Ministry of Ayush. In 2019, she was featured in an international documentary on Ayurveda. She is the founder president of Holistic Health Alliances and founder president of Council for Ayurveda Research, founding director of Ayurveda Anushantan Abhiyan Foundation India, and CEO of My Ayurveda LLC. In 2019, she launched her own high-end organic herbal product line by the name of Swastha. She currently practices in the greater Boston area but has clientele throughout the world. We are extremely obliged to have you here, ma'am. Now, without any further ado, let me hand over the session to Dr. Pratibha Shah, ma'am, to enlighten our mind with her knowledge. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and congratulations to DIKSHA E-Learning platform for organizing these informative webinar series. I'm privileged to be a part of it. Thank you for having me. So today I will be sharing some insights about autoimmune diseases. Everybody must have heard this term, autoimmune diseases, in some way or the other. The autoimmune diseases are on the rise, and they are a product of modern ways of living and modern ways of farming and food production, and so many such modern and global practices that are creating this new pool of diseases, which we may not find mentioned classically, but then that is the beauty of Ayurveda, that once you're able to unravel it, understand it, dissect it, unpack it, you are able to still apply the Ayurvedic principles to whatever new sets of diseases that are emerging and still get successful outcomes. So that is going to be my attempt today, to shed light on the mechanism of autoimmune diseases and see how Ayurveda can approach it, and what can be some of the Ayurvedic therapeutic principles for autoimmune diseases in general. Today, I'm not going to be talking specifically about any particular autoimmune diseases, but in general, trying to gain an understanding for everybody. What do autoimmune diseases mean? How do they develop? What are the mechanisms involved, etc. Before I go any further, I have a question for the organizers. Are you going to be able to record this, or this is being live streamed on YouTube or something?
Yes, ma'am, this is being live streamed in YouTube.
Okay, so
Ma'am.
this can be accessed later on.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am, it is being recorded as well, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
So
you, ma'am.
before I proceed with whatever information I have, I would like to share a personal story. This is just a profile depiction of me and my brother. Just want to share a small story. So my brother was born very healthy, and he was fair in color and chubby. But at 6 months, or roughly 6 to 8 months, he developed some gastric issues, diarrhea, some kind of infection, some kind of stomach bug. And he was treated with strong antibiotics. That was the standard of care at that time. The antibiotics were used like miracle drugs, and they were given like candies, like toffees. There was no discretion about using it cautiously, because it was not known about the impact of the use of antibiotics and repeated use of antibiotics on the gut health. There was no understanding that there is a microbiome inside. So those kind of insights were not available at that time. So he was immediately put on a slew of antibiotics, because he had a very strong, severe infection of the stomach. And as a result of that, he started to remain sick and not energetic, tired. When the other kids would be playing, he would be sitting on the side as he was growing up. And that is how his life unfolded. He continued to be a sickly person. He went about life. He got education, he got his master's, he got a job, he married, he had 2 children. He went about life. But over a period of time, and first thing I want to say, first thing that my mother always told us is that his skin turned dark very early on. He was a very fair child and he became very dark skinned, and he always had health challenges. And over a period of time, he developed autoimmunity. Autoimmunity is a tendency in the body, and he was suspected to have SLE, systematic lupus erythematosus. And in the course of treating SLE, at that time I was already in US, and he was seeking help for SLE. And in that process, somewhere during that time, his hemoglobin dropped considerably, and he was given a blood transfusion. And at that time, there was no screening for hepatitis, and the blood that he was given was infected with hepatitis virus. And without anybody knowing, his liver was destroyed. And by the time it was discovered that his liver is gone, it was too late. He had developed ascites, which is when it was understood that his liver is completely cirrhosed and gone. And despite all of the attempts, he then reached out to me, and then I started helping him with Ayurveda, and he did lose a lot of the ascites water, but he was not able to sustain the recommendations of not being completely meat and alcohol free, and his liver gave in, and he passed away at the age of 46. This is what he looked like. So this is a very personal disease for me for that reason. At the same time, I want to share my story that I was born quite delicate. Much later on, it was discovered that I had a hole in my heart, and I used to faint till the age of 16. Even if I was getting up from a sitting position, I would faint. And this was postural hypotension, when blood would not go to my head. But it was discovered much later on that I had a hole in my heart, and that had something to, and I had some electrical issues with my heart. So I was always sickly. But by my time, my mother had trained herself to become a homeopath, and I grew up on zero allopathy. I grew up completely on homeopathy, and my graph was different, that I started with very low quotient of health, and over a period of time, even though I was quite frequently sick because of my weakness, I went on to become a decent athlete, and otherwise, pretty active and successful in whatever I did. So this is what happened with my brother's health. He started off with very good health, but over a period of time, his health went down. And one of the big contributors to this decline in his health was the courses of antibiotics that he received very early on, in very, very early formative years, or months, actually. He was just an infant. And now, of course, in retrospect, we can understand that his microbiome was completely wiped out. And that led to his immunity being compromised, and his health declined consistently and progressively over the years. And contrasted with my life story, and how my health started off very low quotient. But over a period of time, with all of the swastasya swasthya rakshanam, this is a very powerful principle in Ayurveda, that with the protection of whatever little health I had, I was able to build on my health. And I can say I'm in much better health in my life, even though I'm 57 now. But my health today is much better than when I was a young child. So very contrasting scenarios here. And I wanted to start off with that very personal story. Now, let's come on to the outline for today's topic. What is the immune system? What is autoimmune disease? AD, we're going to call it AD. AD facts, importance and challenges. Mechanism of AD, how to recognize AD, correlating AD with Ayurvedic principles, and then lastly, Ayurvedic approach to AD. So let's start by understanding what is the immune system. The immune system is a system in our body whose designated job is to help. It is the guard of our body. The immune system is the guarding system of our body. So what is its job? Its job is to help identify of all the things that we are surrounded by, right? I'm sitting here right now. I'm surrounded by millions of viruses and bacteria, right? We coexist with nature, right? So the job of the immune system is to identify and then resist and even eliminate dangerous germs that enter the body before they can cause disease or damage. So this is a 24/7, all year round war that is going on silently without us even paying attention or realizing that this is happening. And this is critical to our health and well-being and our very existence, right? So this is the job of the immune system, to silently be there, identify, continuously work to identify, resist, eliminate, destroy all of the harmful germs, bacteria, even mechanical particulate matter, to make sure they are trapped in the mucus and the ciliae and all of the other defense mechanisms that are there in the body. So all of these mechanisms and systems comprise of the immune system. Immunity can be defined as the balanced state of multicellular organisms having adequate biological defenses to fight infection, disease, or other unwanted biological invasions, while also having adequate tolerance to avoid allergy and autoimmune diseases. So both are important. The fight is also important, and also tolerance is also important. So a lot of people who suffer from allergies, that happens because this tolerance level is diminished, it's brought down. So what are the types of immunities? And I have just simplified it for the sake of, just understanding in a very simple way, what are the different immune mechanisms in the body. So one is the innate immunity. Innate immunity is non-specific immunity. Innate immunity is what we are born with. It is the first line of defense. And in this type of immunity or immune system, there is no memory that is generated. This is important to remember. No memory is generated. It is non-specific and it is innate. We are born with it. It is present at birth. This aims to eliminate microbes and other foreign particles using physical barriers. Physical barriers means mechanical barriers, which include skin and mucous membranes. Proteins, different types of proteins that can conjugate with foreign particles and destroy them or neutralize them. And then the mechanisms such as phagocytosis, which is again a mechanical killing of any foreign particle, like the amoeba. If you remember this phagocytosis, like the cell, like an amoeba, will encircle the foreign body and kill it or trap it or may neutralize it. And cytotoxic killing. So that is the first line of defense, or the innate immune system. The adaptive immune system, on the other hand, is what we call acquired immunity. Acquired immunity is acquired over a period of time. And this is specific immunity. This is the second line of defense, and here memory is generated. This is specific to the pathogen presented. So, for example, smallpox, smallpox is eradicated now, chickenpox, shingles, any kind of viral diseases, there will be a memory and there will be some degree of immunity once the infection has happened. Often once you have a viral disease and there is memory generated, you are likely not to get the viral disease again unless your immune system is compromised. And if you get it next time, then these specific antibodies are generated quickly because there has been memory generated in the previous infection. So this is a very simple way of understanding the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. So we will try and remember this, okay? Now, autoimmune diseases refer to problems with the acquired immune system's reactions. In an autoimmune reaction, antibodies and immune cells target the body's own healthy tissues, signaling the body to attack them. So this is called autoimmunity, where the body's intelligence, the buddhi of the cells, is lost, and the body fails to recognize or fails to differentiate between what is the self and what is the other. It fails to distinguish between self and the other. And because that buddhi is lost, and we will see how Agni is central to all of this. So because that buddhi is lost, the body starts to attack itself. This phenomenon is called autoimmunity, and autoimmunity will lead to, depending on where is the Kha Vaigunya and where will be the Sthan Sanchraya of the Ama and other toxins in the body, depending on that, a certain autoimmune disease will be generated. Okay, this is the simple mechanism. Now, let's get a little background about autoimmune diseases, some facts, some critical points, and some challenges about it. So since World War II, there has been a dramatic and alarming worldwide increase of use of chemicals, both in industries and agriculture. Agent Orange, and recently glyphosate use has gone up, and so many other pesticides and weed killers and whatnot. And also genetic modification, which the very nucleus of the entity is modified. So that's another phenomenon that has increased over the years recently. Then increased ease of travel. Because the increased ease of travel, certain microorganisms, species of plants, etc. So there's been a lot of migration or transportation of bugs and plants and even animals that has been happening, and which means different infective agents are reaching newer areas of the world, and the ethnic population may not have the defense mechanisms against those alien organisms, and that can also be contributing to the rise of autoimmune diseases. As per the National Institute of Health, up to 23.5 million Americans suffer from autoimmune diseases. This is not a small number, and the prevalence is rising. In comparison, just see the comparison. Cancer affects up to 9 million only compared to the 23.5 million. How many times is it? Almost 3 times, right? 2.5 to 3 times the number of cancer cases. And heart disease affects up to 22 million. So that number is similar, but you can see the autoimmune diseases, our number of autoimmune diseases cases is really high. The prevalence is also continuing to rise beyond that. 80 to 100 different autoimmune diseases have already been identified, and 40 more are suspected of having an autoimmune basis. These diseases tend to be chronic in nature, affect the quality of life and productivity, and can be life-threatening. These are, each of these points is worth noting, that they can be chronic in nature means they can last for years. They can last for years, and they are progressive. They affect the quality of life in a big way, which means, individuals with compromised productivity, with compromised health, compromised social and emotional well-being, etc. And also can be life-threatening. As I said, I gave the case of my brother. Here, what is really important to note is that even the doctors are clueless. because autoimmune diseases are just being understood in the past 1 decade or so. Prior to that, a lot of these autoimmune diseases were not even identified, not understood. There were no diagnostic measures to diagnose them. And often they would be called idiopathic. Now, idiopathic is an interesting word where, with no disrespect to the medical community, but diseases that make the doctor feel like an idiot, right? Which diseases can make the doctor feel like an idiot? Where the diseases are vague. They're not clear. Their pathology is not clear. Their etiopathology is not clear. So a lot of these diseases were categorized under the idiopathic group. So think about, try to understand the whole spectrum of the autoimmune diseases, that even the well-trained medical doctors, specialists, super specialists, not able to understand or make sense of what is happening. And I will show you in the next slides how a lot of patients would get psychiatric referrals also, because the doctors would get irritated that, they're not able to understand, and the symptoms that are being shared are so vague. I have brain fog. Now, brain fog is being identified as a medical term only now. For many years, this was considered as a very, patient-related terminology, and it was dismissed quite often. Now, the gut-brain connection is being understood, acknowledged, and appreciated more and more. And when a patient reports brain fog, it is being taken much more seriously now and not being dismissed, which is certainly some progress. Autoimmune diseases are one of the top 10 leading causes of death in females in all age groups up to 64 years of age. So each of these bullet points are worth reflecting on and digesting what is the significance of this in these bits of information. Symptoms. Now, the other thing is that symptoms are not confined to any one particular system or organ. They can range across many symptoms and can affect multiple body organs and functions. So, there is confusion even on the part of the doctors that, is it a joint related disease? Is it a metabolic disease? Is it a connective tissue disease? So, the affectation is across multiple body organs and systems and functions. NIH estimates annual direct healthcare costs for AD to be in the range of 100 billion. And this PowerPoint, actually, I have just refreshed it for today's platform, but I made it probably 4-5 years ago. And so numbers must have increased even more as of today. In comparison, cancer costs are 57 billion, just half the cost. So you can see how although cancer gets a lot of limelight and prioritization in budgeting, etc., autoimmune diseases cost and impact on productivity, etc., is far greater than cancer or even heart diseases, which are, heart diseases and stroke together cost about 200 billion. But you can see the comparison here that autoimmune diseases have a big impact on the total healthcare costs for the nation, especially here in the United States. NIH research funding for AD in 2003 came to $591 million. In comparison, cancer funding came to 6.1 billion. You see how disproportionate it is. Even though the cost to healthcare from ADs is much higher, the funding, the budget allocation is much lower as compared to cancer and heart disease and stroke. Now, what are the challenges? Autoimmune diseases are some of the most difficult to recognize. Despite the high quality of diagnostics, it takes an average of 5 years. Let it digest, let it connect with you, 5 years and 4 doctors to get a correct diagnosis. How baffling is that? 5 years is a long time for a person to get clarity on what am I suffering from. 5 doctors and 4 years. Average. And that too, if a patient is lucky. Most often it can be years and they may not get a diagnosis or clarity. What do I have? Why am I feeling like this? Symptoms are often hard to describe. This is the challenge. They are vague and tend to come and go. That's another thing. By the time they get to the doctor, they get an appointment, symptoms are gone. And they themselves are confused. They're like, okay, I had something, but now it's gone, but I still wanted to keep the appointment. Now the doctor doesn't know, the patient doesn't know. And then by the time they go back and in a few weeks or months, symptoms are back again. Autoimmune disease is often not considered until the disease has progressed to a point where severe, classic, or hallmark symptoms occur, though antibodies may already be present. Now, the problem is that most of the doctors will not prescribe an antibody testing until, they wait for many years and they may still not prescribe antibody testing, ANA testing, etc. And even though the biomarkers are present and can be used to get a diagnosis, it is not found in active practice that doctors get to the antibody testing early enough, unfortunately. So these are some of the challenges with the ADs. Now, the interesting part is autoantibodies can be present up to 10 years or more before the outbreak of autoimmune disease, before the classical hallmark symptoms express or manifest. Anti-dsDNA antibodies, for example, precede the development of systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE, by 5 to 10 years. Now we know that. At the time of my brother, this was not known. So if we have a smart clinician who is doing their job, which is doing a proper clinical assessment, darshana, sparshana, prashnehi, everything, then if they are astute, if they are invested, they can easily determine which autoimmune disease is in the stage of development, is in the stage of sthana sanchraya and still not at the vyakti stage, right? So 5 to 10 years is a very long window of time where something can be done, right? Shatkriya Kala, they provide the opportunity to intervene. That is why they are called Kriya Kala, right? So that period is there where still Sthan Sanchraya is happening and Dosha Samurchana is happening. 5 to 10 years, long time. In rheumatoid arthritis, again, for example, ACPAs, CCP may be identified more than 10 years before the occurrence of the first hallmark symptoms of morning rigidity, swelling, pain, etc. Although ACPAs had been recognized for several years, it took a long time for them to be accepted as a diagnostic criteria. This is so tragic because easily, if this had been integrated as a practice, as a standard practice, that you should, anytime there is any swelling, rigidity, pain, complaint, do an ACPA, see if there is an autoimmunity developing already. Only last year, which means like 5-6 years ago, ACPA's detection along with the well-known rheumatoid factor has been included in the American College of Rheumatology guidelines as diagnostic criteria for rheumatoid arthritis. This is really tragic. Whatever little the understanding is there in the Western medical science, but it takes such a long time for it to get integrated for the benefit of the patient, right? Now, ARDA, which is the American Association for Research Development in Autoimmune Diseases, something like that. You can look up what's the full form. ARDA found that more than half of patients with autoimmune diseases had been labeled chronic complainers. This is what I was mentioning. Internally, they are notated as chronic complainers. There's like psychiatric patients, just ignore them, just get them out of your examination room. So this is a fact, and this is a very sad fact, that they were labeled as chronic complainers during the earlier stages of their illnesses. Specialists were generally aware of interrelationships between the different autoimmune diseases or advances in treatment outside their own specialty area, right? If you have a orthopedician, they are just aware of their area of specialization. Anything else happening anywhere else in the body, we already talked about autoimmune diseases not being confined to one system, one organ, right? Multiple systems, multiple organs, multiple functions being impacted. So there was lack of awareness amongst the specialists themselves of anything that's outside of their scope of specialization. That is a challenge. Research is generally disease specific and limited in scope. When you have a spectrum of organs and functionalities being impacted, then research, there is no clarity. How do we conduct research on this? So that was a challenge. Inability to quickly identify an autoimmune disease can take a serious toll on a patient. Think about the patient. They don't know. They are feeling very confused. What is happening with me? Why am I feeling like this? Why am I getting these vague symptoms? I can't even describe them to the doctor. And then when they go to the doctor, they do not even get a proper audience with the doctor, right? The doctors dismiss it. So all in all, very tragic. The Institute of Medicine reports that the US is behind other countries in research into immune system self-recognition, the process involved in autoimmune disease. This is the intermediary process. Now, this is where there was some, you can say, a kind of, what can we call it? A landmark understanding. There's this doctor called Alexander Fasano, and I know him. Fortunately, I heard him in a conference and we connected, and he's a believer in Ayurveda. He came up with this triad of AD, triad of autoimmune disease. And here you can see that there are three key factors in play. One is genetics, second is environmental factors, and third is gut dysbiosis. This is an important one. This is where our Ayurvedic understanding of Agni, and Agni being Kaya and Kaya being Agni, this is a very important connection with Ayurvedic understanding of autoimmune diseases, and I will speak about it a little more. So these three together play a major role in the development of autoimmune disease, and these three are genetic predisposition, environmental factors, including infections, anything agantuka from outside, gut dysbiosis, and we'll try and understand these better now. Genetic variants predispose to multiple autoimmune diseases. So there are some variants in the genes that can cause some kind of predisposition or vulnerability to multiple autoimmune diseases. Specific genes predispose humans to specific autoimmune disease. So there are general genetic variants and there are specific genes also. Familial clustering in some autoimmune diseases has also been demonstrated in twin studies with higher disease concordance in monozygotic twins as compared to dizygotic twins. So there is some hereditary component as well. A large population-based survey revealed patients with multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis were more likely to have other autoimmune diseases. So once you have one autoimmune disease, you are likely to have other autoimmune diseases because the common pathway is the autoimmunity. Once that buddhi is lost at the cellular level, where the body loses the understanding or the recognition or the discernment between self and the other, then it's a free-for-all. Once you get an autoimmune disease, it paves the way for other autoimmune diseases. And often you will see that anybody who presents with one autoimmune disease has comorbidities with other autoimmune diseases. However, this concordance rate is only 10 to 40% for most autoimmune diseases, indicating environmental factors also playing a major role. Now, what are the environmental factors? They can be chemical toxicants, heavy metals, viruses, bacteria, emotional stress, drugs, adjuvants such as aluminum hydroxide used in vaccines and medical silicons used in breast implants can cause an autoimmune disorder known as Schoenfeld syndrome. Aluminum hydroxide in hepatitis B vaccine causes liver cell destruction and is increasingly identified as a contributing cause of autoimmune disease in immunized patients. So, the concept of vaccination in itself is not bad, and concept of vaccination is found in ancient Ayurvedic treatises as well, where there's a reference of a spear being used to puncture the pox pustule on a cow and injecting a human being with that to inoculate the human being. So the concept of vaccination in itself is not a bad one, but the modern synthesis of the vaccines or production of the vaccines is what is problematic. The ingredients that go into the manufacturing of the modern vaccines is what is problematic, right? Now, it's also important to remember bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites can trigger autoimmune disorders through several mechanisms. Molecular mimicry, epitope spreading, viral persistence, polyclonal activation. We won't go into these details. These are the microbiological details of the process of how these infections lead to autoimmunity. Inflammatory activation of innate immunity. These are some of the processes through which the autoimmunity develops. The total burden of multiple infections can also trigger autoimmunity. If someone is getting repeated infections, different types of infections, viral infection, bacterial infection, respiratory infection, bladder infection, the total load of infections can itself trigger autoimmunity, that lack of buddhi. Moreover, an infection can amplify an autoimmune disease by either exacerbating an ongoing disorder, including a relapse, or by leading to chronic progressive disease. So this is how multiple infections can also lead to autoimmunity. Another example of infectious agents associated with autoimmune disorders is the link between EBV virus and the occurrence of systemic autoimmune diseases, SADs. EBV is an omnipresent infectious virus here, at least in the West, affecting approximately 95% of the world's population. Here in the US, it is at least identified and is familiar to the medical community. In many parts of the world, it's not even in the radar of the medical personnel. But in US, it is very well identified and recognized and is looked for in cases of autoimmune diseases if there is a history of infection with EBV. In children, EBV causes a mild asymptomatic infection. In adolescents, it causes infectious mononucleosis. And here, anybody who is practicing in the West must have heard from many patients, I've had mono. I've had mono when I was a child. So infectious mononucleosis, this is what it is, EBV. After the first lytic infection, EBV persists in resting memory of the B cells for the rest of the patient's life. This is the nature of viruses, that they can lie dormant in our cells for long periods of time. The viruses, the very nature of viruses is that they can lie in a dormant state in the cells for many, many years, and then they can get activated and trigger, what we call active phases of the disease. And they can switch between an active lytic cycle and a latent state from which it occasionally reactivates, making it a continuous challenge to the patient's immune system, which then gets burdened and weakened and ultimately starts to break down and loses its sensibilities, again, the buddhi. So now, what are some of the other environmental factors that we need to pay attention to? Humans, we have to acknowledge this very, very key thing. Humans ate freshly harvested, ethnic, seasonal foods, fresh foods for centuries. Meat was consumed only when a fresh game had been caught, right? When they had to go and hunt, and the animal's meat would be fresh. There was no refrigeration, so you had to eat it fresh. There was no no process of adding loads of preservatives to increase shelf life and blah blah blah. And now we have all kinds of modifications, alterations, mutilation of our food process, growing processes, which is really very, very worrisome, concerning, tragic. New strains of grains have been developed, which have led to all kinds of intolerances, celiac disease, gluten intolerance, gluten sensitivity, colitis, ulcerative colitis, so many gut issues that are new to the current times. Increased use of pesticides, fungicides, increase and indiscriminate. You have to get the crop, no matter if it is full of poison, right? You increase an indiscriminate use of pesticides, fungicides, and insecticides has increased. Cows are injected with hormones, kept under cruel conditions. Not just cows, pigs, you name it, whatever meats we are using for as food are kept in horrible, inhumane conditions, which means they are inflamed, they are infected, they are pumped with so many chemicals to make them grow quickly, to make them bulky and meaty, and we've lost our marbles as human beings. We've become a completely disconnected and unintelligent. We have also lost our buddhi, which is why our cells are losing our buddhi. So this is very, very important. I think this slide is very, very important, and next few slides are very important for us to understand what is exactly happening. What is the nidana of autoimmune diseases? Because again, the first step of treatment is nidana parivarjana. If you don't understand nidana properly, you're just treating pain, inflammation, skin and rashes and all that, right? So we have to understand the nidana first very clearly, because that is the first step of the treatment, elimination of the causative factors. So now antibiotics and hormones are used again increasingly and indiscriminately in concentrated animal feeding operations, which are called CAFOs, which include cattle, hogs, turkey, chicken, and meat is produced completely factory style. And at this time, wheat, soy, and corn, more than 90% of wheat, soy, and corn are genetically modified. This is a fact. Chemical ingredients in our food, such as artificial preservatives, colorings, and flavorings, have become very common. Now, I must say, at this time, in relation to this particular bullet, that when I came to the US, my children were small, and there was this culture of kids taking cupcakes to the school for their birthdays or any other celebratory, milestones. And most of the times, those cupcakes would be colored, intensely colored, and on top of it, it would have what we call sprinklers, which would also have so many bright colors, green, yellow, red, purple. And that used to make me feel so alarmed. This is what young children are consuming. And I have seen that increasingly and very commonly all around me. Ice creams have toppings which have colorings. Cakes are so colored. And it really blows my mind how people are not paying attention to this. So this is where, all of the causes of diseases. The Pragya Prada is happening, the Asatmendriya Sanyoga is happening. And, we, in the 21st century, we are working hard to develop artificial intelligence. And it's ironic that we, as sentient beings with a lot of intelligence and wisdom, we are losing our innate intelligence and ability to know these things, what is good for us and what is bad for us. So it's very ironical that we might succeed in creating AI and, very advanced robots, and we are becoming probably the unsmartest species on the planet. So think about it. What are we doing to ourselves? And we are really poisoning our air, water, earth, and we are poisoning in a way that this poison will remain. These glyphosates and other things that we are putting into the earth and water sources, they will not go away soon, anytime soon. They will remain. They don't disintegrate quickly. So this is something to chew on. Again, this slide also I feel is very important for, and again, this is not the whole spectrum of what is happening. These are just some of the key things. So it just worries me and blows my mind that we are so disconnected as a human species in the 21st century, and we are creating diseases for ourselves. So very, very tragic. And this is where I would like to start focusing more attention of anybody who's listening to this talk, because this is where we need to start working. Nidana Parivarjanam, again and again I'm saying that. We have to start identifying what is the root cause. Why are the autoimmune diseases going up? It's not magic. It's not mystery. This is what is increasing the autoimmune diseases. There's no confusion about this. So let's see what else is here. Use of artificial sweeteners is rising. We consume more than twice the amount of salt that we should. More and more preservatives, potassium salts, sodium salts going into all of our food products to increase shelf life. We have become a species of convenience. We want to just pick up a can and pour things out. We don't want to wash. We don't want to cut. We don't want to grow. And whatever we are growing also, we are very obsessed with the optics of it. We want everything to be beautiful. Our tomatoes should be perfectly round and perfectly red. Our watermelons should be perfectly sweet. Everything we have messed up, we have interfered with nature. And there are consequences to that, those conveniences and those beautifications. We want free-flowing salt. How much damage that free-flowing salt is doing to us. These are small things, but these are very fundamental things. Who is not using salt every day? Without realizing this might be a cause of some of my problems. So, this is more, I can talk about it for hours, I just gave a talk on an Australian platform just on the day I arrived back in US, on the night of, when did I come? 18th. On food, on the current and global trends in food from Ayurveda perspective, and what is their impact. And I was talking about many of these things in that talk. So this is a very, very important topic. Just the use of plasticizers such as bisphenol A in food and beverage containers contributes to the overreaching environmental exposure to xenobiotics. These are interfering with our hormonal health. There are endocrine, disruptors. So it's just all around, everywhere. You have to think about if you're bringing a sofa, for example, that is stain-free. It means, what it actually means, it is coated with chemicals. Now, when you're sleeping on it, you're breathing those chemicals. When you have an aerosol that you're spraying and cleaning, right? The advertisement and the marketing looks great. Oh, there was so much of muck on my wall. I just sprayed this. Wow, this is magical. I just can wipe it. No need to scrub and brush. But what happened when you sprayed? You also breathed in those chemicals. Aerosols are fine particulate matter. Those things go right into your lung tissue. So what happened? The wall looks very clean. Now, what happened to your lungs? These things we have to pay attention. We have become a species of convenience, and we have taken leave of our senses. What are the ultimate consequences of these conveniences? All the conveniences come at a cost. Widespread use of antibiotics, antacids. Now, people are taking PPIs like, it's toffee, candies. Pop in, my acidity is gone. Now I can have my next slice of pizza, right? Really taken leave of our senses. Histamine 2 blockers and other drugs. Some sniffling, or let me take an antihistamine and I'm good, right? Now it's stopping my mucus production. Mucus production is part of my mechanical barrier. It's part of my immune system. I'm not going to think about it. Just some snizzles and all of that, and I'm going to take some anti-allergy medication and just not think about what the consequences are, what is happening. So adds to the milieu of chemicals we consume. And all of these medicines or drugs, chemical drugs that expire or are no longer being used, you flush them in the toilet. Where does it go? Into the water supply. None of our water treatment facilities are removing chemicals from the water. So what happens? Now your water is full of antibiotics. It's full of all kinds of chemical drugs. I have made the list somewhere. So let me come to that. Now, several factors can affect the gut microbiota. The motility of the gastrointestinal tract, the intake of pharmaceutical medications, including antacids, antibiotics, and NSAIDs, poor diet, smoking, the use of alcohol, the GIT transit time, mucosal blood flow, renal clearance. In any of these, if there is an issue or if you're doing any of these, then your gut microbiota can be impacted. The normal harmony between the good bacteria and the commensal bacteria. This can lead to the uptake of antigens from the lumen, what we call leaky gut. Disproportionate uptake of these antigens coupled with the suppression of immune responsiveness or the failure of the immunological tolerance can lead to immunological reactions both within the gut and in the organs and follow one of the two pathways. Physiological transport consists of ligand receptor uptake, antibody uptake, and lastly, microfold or M cell transport. We won't go into these details. Pathological transport is either antigen-specific or non-specific. Antigen-specific transport via the transcellular or paracellular pathways has the ability to bring about a specific disease. So one is a generic and one is a specific pathway. Our gut, with a surface area of approximately 200 square meters, is where we come into greatest contact with the outside world. Remember, this is the most dynamic part of our body. Our skin is as it is, our heart is as is. Most of the parts of our body are just not being impacted, or they are more in a consistent environment. But this, from here to the anus, is the dynamic part of our body where daily we are putting in something new and some activities going on, and every time it's a different process. So this is the large area. 200 square meters, not a small area, right? Is where we come into greatest contact with the outside world. Gut also has the largest collection of immune cells. Please, let's appreciate this for a minute. So gut is immunity. Gut is where Agni is, according to Ayurveda. So Agni is Kaya. So all of this connects very well from Ayurveda perspective. Consisting of 70% of all lymphoid tissues in the body. It serves to prevent the outgrowth of pathogenic organisms at any time. We carry approximately 1 into 10 to the power of 13 times microorganisms in our gut, more than 10 times the total number of cells in our bodies. And so there is this interesting school of thought, are we really human beings, or are we large colonies of bacteria? Large bacterial colonies, we are just a large colony. We are not a human being. Just an interesting thing to reflect on. Diet can substantially affect the microbiota of the gut. And we all know that what Ayurveda says, Ahara, Nidra, Brahmacharya, right? 3 tripods, Treya Upastamba. We'll come to that also. Now, the epithelial cells of the gut have secretory, digestive, and absorptive functions. 3 distinct functions: secretory, to secrete enzymes, juices, etc. Digestive, to process whatever we are eating. When we eat an apple, it becomes the dhatus, the ahara rasa, the dhatus, and that is the digestion happening, the dynamic breakdown of the materials that we ingest. And then the absorption of the useful material, the sara in the kitta, right? The sara bhaga gets absorbed. This differentiation, this assimilation, all of these functions, the epithelial cells of the gut are performing. And these have receptors to facilitate their participation in the immunological processes. So they are also part of the immune system. So think about this as the active dynamic part of our system. Epithelial cells are the first point of contact for gut bacteria. So if these cells are destroyed or messed up or impaired or broken down, that's it. Everything gets messed up progressively. The epithelial layer of the gut is a major barrier between the host and the environment and is composed of a single layer of interconnected epithelial cells. This layer is reinforced by tight junctions in the paracellular spaces between the epithelial cells. This is what we call the strong gut lining. And this is like a strong barrier which prevents any antigens or foreign material to leach into our insides, our rest of the organs and tissues. These tight junctions of the epithelial layer of the gut act as a highly regulated entry that open and close depending on signals. They don't open the door for anybody, right? So it's a very regulated barrier that we have naturally in our body. The epithelial cells also make contact with the immune system of the gut and line the lamina propria of the small and large intestines and Peyer's patches, which are organized lymphoid tissues. So these are all part of the immune system. The Peyer's patches are critical for the direct antigen sampling, testing. What is this? Who are you? Show your ID, right? Show your documents. Only when we approve, then you will be you will be allowed to pass. So this is what Peyer's patches do. And this is where immune responses are induced and regulated. This is essential for gut health as too little or no bacterial exposure. Again, we know that cesarean births where there is reduced bacterial exposure or lack of breast milk, being fed on breast milk, mother's breast milk, this can have an impact on the gut health because of reduced exposure. As in germ-free conditions can impair immune responses, whereas excessive contact with bacteria may cause an increase in pro-inflammatory immune response. So we need just the balance, sama, not ati or not hina. Now, I've just put this picture just to give a little example of how a clean gut lining can look like. Pink, clean, organized, strong, no holes, no barriers, no breakages, right? This is a clean, nice, clean, strong wall. If we don't pay attention to what we are eating and we are, infected repeatedly with different types of infections, any of the scenarios that we have talked about, then the gut lining can start to look like this. Yeah, full of toxic material, broken. There are deposits. There are there is dampness, there is no movement, right? Everything is stagnant, damp, congested, and full of foreign and toxic material, right? This is how it can start to look like, just as an example, not that this is what the gut lining looks like. And this is the gut-brain axis. We won't talk about it in detail right now. This is being understood and acknowledged more and more as we start to learn more about the intimate connection between the gut and the brain and the other organs. The gut-brain axis acts as a bidirectional communication between the brain and the gut. The brain modulates gastrointestinal function, and the gastrointestinal system is monitored by the brain via neural, immunological, and endocrine mechanisms. The development and function of the enteric nervous system are influenced by the intestinal microbiota. The gastrointestinal system is directly controlled by the enteric nervous system, the second brain. The system consists of more neurons than the spinal cord, mainly in the myenteric and submucosal plexuses. Now, this is another new revelation to the medical world, that there are more neurons and neurotransmitters being manufactured in the gut than the brain. So there is a complete nervous system in the gut, which is called the enteric nervous system, and it is being called the second brain of the body. But if we look from the Ayurveda perspective, this is probably the primary brain, and this is the second brain of the body, right? Something to think about. Because this brain is ultimately listening to the primary brain, which is the enteric brain. So which is the primary brain then? The enteric brain, right? In adults, chronic stress affects the composition of the gut microbiota. Now, stress is again something which is increasing worldwide significantly. And also now we are seeing increased severe levels of stress in the younger generation. And that has a direct impact on the composition of the gut. This is where we can see a direct mind-body connection, where it doesn't matter what your physiological composition of the gut is, but if you're chronically stressed here, the composition of the gut is altered. Coupled with this are the increasing levels of interleukin-6 indicating immune activation. Chronic stress also makes the gut leaky, what we talked about, impairment in those tight junctions, increasing circulating levels of LPS. Findings of altered intestinal permeability, which is leaky gut, may play a pathogenic role in patients with depression. MS is one of the most frequent and severe demyelinating neurological diseases, mainly affecting young people, eventually leading to their becoming disabled. And increased intestinal permeability in these patients has been reported. MS has also been related to infections with bacteria and viruses. So it's so complicated. Although MS is a neurological disease, now we are finding some correlation with history of infections in these individuals and some correlation with the gut permeability in these individuals. So which is the primary disease and which is the secondary is an interesting question now that is being explored. Now, fatigue due to lack of quality of sleep, disruption of, these are some of the common symptoms of autoimmune diseases. Disruption of the energy production mechanism in cells, either from lack of oxygen, increased toxicity, infections, or a malfunction of the mitochondria. Sleep disturbance, difficulty in falling and remaining asleep, loss of attention focus and short-term memory loss, emotional fragility. Now, according to Ayurveda, okay, let's complete this. Gas, bloating, abdominal tenderness, tendency for constipation or diarrhea, almost an out-of-body feeling that can be most disconcerting, something you can't put in words, but an out-of-body feeling. Non-specific pains, including migraines, dizziness, cloudy feeling in the head, brain fog, what I was talking about, unable to perform normal day-to-day functions. So these are some of the general symptom pool that you can find in autoimmune diseases. Now we start to come to the Ayurvedic principles and how they can be applied and connected with what we know about autoimmune diseases to understand them from the perspective of Ayurvedic principles. So the very foundation of health, the very definition, the very beautiful, comprehensive definition of health in Ayurveda, samadoshaha, samadhatu, samagnishcha, malakriyaha, prasanna atmendriya manaha, swastha ityabhidhiyate. So harmony in our body, in our physiology, but more than that, an equilibrium and harmonious state of our mind and spirits and sense organs is what defines health. So this is the ideal definition of health. And we talked about the 3 pillars of health, ahara, nidra, brahmacharya. In Western medical science, the importance of sleep is just now being, there is increased acknowledgement of the role of lack of sleep, proper sleep in overall well-being, immunity also. And past few decades have led to that increased understanding. And now we are beginning to hear about sleep labs and sleep studies, etc. And Ayurveda has mentioned that 4,000 years ago. So we'll keep this in mind, Ahara, Nidra, Brahmacharya. And the 3 causes, primary causes of diseases, Pragya, Prada, Satmendriyata, Sanyoga, and Kala. Basics of Ayurveda, we have to always keep in mind. Now, the key factors at play in autoimmune disease are Agni, Ama, like in most disease etiology. We find Agni impairment and Ama involvement. State of Dosha Dhatu Mala is impaired. Homeostasis is impaired. Disturbance in Prasanatmendriya Manaha status. Harmony of the mind and spirit is disturbed. And we can easily appreciate it, as I was saying, that the levels of stress are severe and insane in current times. Depletion of ojas. Everybody is running behind something in the 21st century, and there is no time to stop for self-care, to breathe, to connect with oneself. So the reserves, and ojas means our reserve, and it translates into our immune reserves. That there is depletion of that. State of Sara, Samanan, and Bala. What is going on with that? We don't take that into consideration often enough. So we have to assess the Sara, Samanan, and Bala also, and their role in the autoimmune diseases. And some of the common issues with what things are affecting the homeostasis of mind and body. Practices of adhyashana, atyashana, anashana, eating of heavy fast foods, eating leftovers, genetically modified foods, cold foods, ice drinks, unsuitable food combining, viruddhahara, poor quality of food, all the refined, processed, altered, toxic foods, and excessive animal products. In the West, people are obsessed with proteins. So in the name of proteins, there will be a piece of meat tucked in somewhere. It's there in the salad. It's there in the sandwich. It's there in the pasta. So somewhere there is meat. Oh, I need my protein intake. So very, very misguided approach to eating. Poor elimination of waste. So not just the bowels, but at the cellular level and at the level of the mind. Bad sleep hygiene and irregular sleeping habits, bad quality sleep. Sleep is really, really messed up, especially in the West, and in India also. Now I'm seeing in the cities, it's the same thing as in the West. People are compromising on the sleep as if it has really no value for health and well-being. Excessive indulgence in stimulants like alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, recreational drugs, etc. improper care in pregnancy. There are so many factors there that are really that impact at a very foundational level, impact our health and well-being, and therefore the immune system. So, for example, and I'll just give small examples. I think I have a couple more slides. These days, it is celebrated that, oh, you know what? I was back to work on the next day after delivering my child, or within a week, I was back to work. And the society also celebrates and applauds that. This is tragic, actually. You know, it's nothing to be celebrated, nothing to be proud of. When a woman delivers a baby, it's a very depleting and taxing biological event. And the woman needs enough rest and replenishment to compensate for that exhausting life event. Those things, those very common sense things, are not being taken into account these days. So that is really worrisome and tragic, and certainly with all the outcomes and consequences that we are seeing. Stress, worry, fear, anxiety, anger, all these are on the rise. Everybody is frustrated with everybody else, right? Everybody is irritated, annoyed, short-tempered, because nobody has time for self-care. Nobody has time to breathe. And these are very, they seem like, oh, how can that impact my well-being? But these are small, but very key and central things, and very profound things. And oftentimes you don't find a very big and prominent cause, very visible cause. Oh, this is why I have got this disease. It's not like that. It's all these small things that combine together and then interconnect. And with repeated, pragyaparada, there is a gradual breakage of the system, gradual breakdown of the system. And this is what we need to acknowledge and understand. Because unless we appreciate and understand the pathway to the illness, we will not be able to unpack it for wellness. Overuse of drugs. Anything, I have a pain, let me go take a painkiller. Okay, pain is gone. Whatever it did, I don't even know what it did to my body. Next time again I have pain, I'll take it. I have acidity, I'll take some PPIs or antacids. So it's a pill popping culture is a problem. Presence of xenobiotics, as I've already talked about, petrochemical fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides that enter the body from the food chain. So food may look like food, but it is not the food that it used to be. And when we see food from the definition of food in Ayurveda, today's food does not measure up. So those are the things I had covered in my food talk, which are really, really critical. Then all of the other things, holding of the urges, toxicity and deterioration of our air, water and earth, our natural resources. Now we are drinking water. Sometimes water itself may be a big cause of the nidana for the illness. But, how many people are paying attention? What is the quality of my water? I don't think, barely a few on the fingertips might be paying attention to, what is the quality of my water? What am I drinking with it and not knowing? Because things are odorless, chemicals are odorless, and they are colorless. So you really don't know unless you get your water analyzed by a lab. Then there is a culture of excesses, everything in excess. Marathons, I'm running continuous marathons, then I'm getting hip replacements, right? I'm partying in excess. Watching movie, doing sports, anything that you see around you, I see Ati yoga everywhere. Exposure to wind, sun, heat, work, indulgence, everything is on the over side of things. A disconnect with the real self and connection with an image. So swastha itself means to connect to yourself, to be established in your own self. But now Everybody is pursuing an image. The white people want to become brown, so they are using all kinds of browning creams and tanning beds and whatnot. And all the brown people want to become white, so they are using fairness creams and God knows all kinds of bleaching agents and whatnot. So nobody is satisfied with who they are. This is where Ayurveda philosophy comes into play and can be very, very important. All of the Sattva Vajaya, Deva Vyapashra, we're not talking about it. All of us as practitioners have become Western style practitioners. Yes, tell me your disease and I'm writing my prescription. Ahara, Vihara, Sattva Vajaya, Deva Vyapashra, none of that, right? We need to change as practitioners also. Irregular lifestyle, trauma, nutritional deficiencies in our diet today because the earth is depleted, right? Principles of management of AD now. I think we are coming very close to the time. Nidana Parivarjana. And then first is Nidana Parivarjana, Agni Dipna Ampachana. I've just simplified this. Vyadhi Pratyanika Aushadhi Dravyas and Rasayana. So simple steps. And then, of course, Pathya. Big. Principles of management of AD, staggered approach, Langana, Dinacharya, Ritucharya, Panchakarma, Dhyana, Yoga, Pranayama, Sattva. Again, a laundry list, very general list. And some of the herbs and polyherbals. On the right side, you see single herbs. On the left side, you see some polyherbals. And this is very important. Whatever the disease, rest, clean air, pure water, and nutritious fresh food will still be needed to initiate and complete the process of healing. We have to remind ourselves of simple things. We often disregard, oh, now let's find a magical cure for the disease. Simple things, profound. Please remember this. So thank you. And thank you for staying with me. So it was a long presentation. Any questions? I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for taking your time to prepare such an extraordinary, enlightening session, which was extremely informative. Now, we shall go ahead to the question and answer session. Shall we begin, ma'am?
Yes.
Ma'am, there is a question, ma'am. A 6-year-old girl has celiac disease. Can you help us how to manage?
Sorry, can you say that slowly again?
A 6-year-old girl has celiac disease, ma'am. Please help me on how to manage this, ma'am.
Okay. So I refrain from answering these kind of questions because I have no history of the girl. So please ask some academic questions. That will be better.
Okay, ma'am. And there is another question, ma'am. Any dinacharya modification in reactive arthritis, ma'am?
Yes, exactly all the slides that I gave. There is no one answer. You have to find out what are the irregularities in that particular patient. There is no general list you can hand out because their problem might be lying in some other areas, not what you're giving them the list. So unless you go through the Darshana Spashna Prashna, you don't ask specific patients, please, because this is not the correct way to use this time, I feel. Please don't ask about particular case, diseases. Yeah, lichen planus is autoimmune. Yeah.
And there is another question, ma'am. Participants can also raise their hands so that we can ask ma'am questions directly. Ma'am, there is a question, ma'am. Can we approach immune disorders as doshaja radhuknya jara, ma'am?
Yes. So I have just opened the chat box and I see the last comment from Dr. Tushar. Hetu Viprit Chikitsa is what I would like to suggest rather than categorize it as Tridoshaja Dhatugata Jwara or any other category, because autoimmune diseases are not a disease. Autoimmune disease is a category of different diseases. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So autoimmune diseases can be very different. They can be in different systems, different organs, and therefore we cannot call it Dhatugata Tridosha Jwara. However, I can pick up the last comment and say the Hetu Viparita Chikitsa might be a good way to go about it. But most importantly, go through the Darshana Spashana Prashnehi method of assessment, clinical assessment. History taking is very vital and critical to getting success in treating autoimmune diseases. Doesn't matter where they are located. I have had a lot of success in autoimmune diseases. And, as I said, I have a personal connection with autoimmune diseases. I shared my story. And over the years, I have kind of specialized, you can say, in autoimmune diseases. So could you please tell a little bit about your experience in US working with allopathy medicine doctors to manage autoimmune diseases? Okay, so yeah, and Dr. Tushar, it's not just Vats and Prapti, it's all Tridoshas could be involved in depending on which autoimmune disease you're talking about. One of the doshas may be predominantly involved. So there is no generalization. We can't say, as I said, autoimmune diseases is a pool of diseases. It's not one disease. So my experience working here with autoimmune diseases has been very, very good. I'm very client-centric. So for me, my client is the most important entity in the whole interaction. I try to work with their primary care physicians, their specialists, if they are open to it. And if the client is willing, sometimes the client is afraid, no, we can't tell that we are trying Ayurveda on the side, because then my doctor might get annoyed and they might get angry with me. So they feel uncomfortable. Oftentimes the client doesn't want to share with their primary caregivers that they are trying Ayurveda. And most of my clients are Americans, Caucasians, Indians are now increasing over the years as I've started to do more educational public speaking over the past decade or so. So the good thing about the Americans is that they are very good rogis. They follow the instructions to the T. Most of them. Of course, there are exceptions, but in general, the rogis are very good. So I give a lot of credit to my rogis for following all of the recommendations. My approach is, of course, depending on which kind of autoimmune disease is presenting. First of all, history is very, very important. You have to build the pathway etiology. How did this disease come about? Was it due to the Nidana was stress? Then your Chikitsa Sutra will be focused on mitigating the stress. I hope you all understand. Sattva Vajaya and counseling and all of the reassurance and all those kind of things. And with medicines, some Brahmi, some Ashwagandha, some Shankapushpi, etc. Number one. So identifying the Nidanas, very important. Second, looking at all the, Bala, Satmya, and Vaya of the patient. What are the things that you can work with this patient? And then here in the West, I have barely 10%. 10% is also optimistic of the formulary available to me. So within that, it has been challenging to work, but I'm very happy to see the successful outcomes that I have received. And I do start always with Agni Deepana, Pachana, Ampachana. First phase is typically always that. And all of the basic foundational things, can you start to sleep little bit on time? Can you start to remove the iced water? Can you start to drink some cooked water? Simple things. And I'm telling you, simple things, you have to trust the principles of Ayurveda. They are very, very powerful and they work wonderfully. And I'm happy to share with you that I have treated MS and I have a testimonial on my website. I usually don't take testimonials. I forget to take testimonials, but there is one of a young woman who became RA negative after doing Ayurveda treatment with me. And Lyme's disease and MS, so many different autoimmune diseases I've had the privilege of having successfully resolved. And they continue to be well even now. So that's another thing. When you educate them, inform them about the ahara, vihara, and how they can start to shift their lives. Because see, one very big problem is that the Ayurvedic practitioners are also becoming very Western styled Ayurvedic practitioners. Disease prescription, that's it. No education, no patient education. Now, if you have not talked about the nidana of the disease, they will indulge in the nidana again. They will start to party late again. They will start to stress again. So unless you educate them, they will again go back to that disease loop. And that is not the correct way for a chikitsak to be treating the diseases. Yeah, my website I can share here in the chat, and my email ID I had shared, but please be aware that my schedule is also very busy. I may be slow in answering. Not necessarily. Repeated Shodhana, Dr. Savita, they here we are not able to do Panchakarma classically. I do some Virechana type of Panchakarma, focused on Virechana, and we can't do Vamana and the other ones here because of all the legal issues. But Shodhana is not necessary. I mean, these are all notions that we have, that we, unless we do Shodhana, how the person will improve. But really, you have to still be able to help your patient irrespective of limitations and circumstances. So here, for example, in the US, I don't use the title of doctor. There are a lot of legal implications. You see, my name also is coming up as Pratibha Shah. Doctor of Ayurveda, I can write. I can't write Dr. Pratibha Shah here. I can't use the words patient, diagnosis, disease, treatment, etc. I use the word client. So it may be very difficult for you to imagine how challenging it is to practice here. But despite challenges and limitations, you have to always be invested and committed to help your client. And clients do respond beautifully. And I have a lovely lady here who is Susan Ganley. Good to see you here. She's here. She's a big seeker of Ayurveda, I must say. So any other questions? Otherwise, we can wrap up. I have some consultations lined up now.
Thank you, ma'am. Shall we wind up the question and answer session, ma'am? Thank you, ma'am, for patiently answering all the questions, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now, I invite Dr. Devi S. Nair, Associate Professor, Department of Roga Nidana, Ayurveda College, Coimbatore, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, autoimmunity is really a perplexed topic among students and clinicians while practicing. So through your personal experience, throughout your presentation, you pointed the dangers in the society, like free-flowing salt, the toppings in the cupcakes, then aerosols in the cleaning agents, the antacids and antibiotics we are using without any like thoughtless use. So all these, including the Sudhiga pericheria, ma'am, actually we have to educate the patients, and even the Swastha people also. These things are important in life. Equal delivery, like delivery, the Sudhiga pericheria is also equally important. And Nidana Parivarjana is one other important thing while treating. And another one, what I really like this is about the immunity. The major aspect is in your koshta. So the koshta, once you clear the koshta or once you correct the koshta, then your immunity, whatever you treat, whatever the diseases in the related to autoimmune, you'll get a balance, you'll get a control. Then actually we are really pleased to have you, ma'am. It was a very informative session for all the clinicians and students. And I would also like to say gratitude because you are in a busy schedule. And thank you so much, ma'am, from the part of Ayurveda College of Coimbatore and DIKSHA E-Learning.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Nice to connect with all of you.
Thank you,
Namaste.
ma'am. Work for a cause, not for applause. Live your life to express, not to impress. Thank you all for patiently listening and for the valuable time spent. Next session is by Dr. Mahesh Irulal, Associate Professor, Department of Roganitan, STM College of Ayurveda and Hospital, Hassan, Karnataka, on the topic Etiopathogenesis of Kamala and interpretation of LFT in hepatobiliary disorders. To know more about our updates, please do stay connected with our social platforms. That's all for today's most interesting session with lots of new information for us to close our eyes with thought-provoking knowledge. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
ಆಯ್ತಪ್ಪ ಇಡೀ ಇಲ್ಲ